Right, so both the Tories and Labour have decided to target young voters. But whereas Sunak seems intent on driving away what few of them might support his Tory party in a bid to woo older voters instead, pitching young against old, Keir Starmer prefers his old established trick of seemingly choosing to lie to them and act like he's offering young people something, opting to put a big fat sweetener on the table for some would-be young voters, pitching an idea that has proven popular amongst teen voters previously or would-be voters for a very long time. The problem Starmer has, though, is that this particular pitch for the youth vote is already being exposed as a cynical ploy and a promise to ditch later like so many others, because as much as he's promising something lovely with one hand, he's already taking something away with the other, and is arguably about to make that particular broken promise a whole lot worse. Right, so Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have in recent days, early days of the election campaign, outlined some of their intentions as far as young people and young voters go, and their opposing approaches certainly exposes their party attitudes towards the youth vote, and despite their policies and how they will run the country being virtually identical, they have very different attitudes towards young voters, and that clearly stems from where the youth vote has gone in recent years and the last few elections. Very few people below the age of 40, never mind the teen voters or young adult voters that are the focus of this video, look towards the Tories anymore. That's been a trend for a long time now. Removing their ability to study in Europe was a smack in the teeth. Hiking to their tuition fees already has been another. So it simply isn't a demographic that the Tories appeal to at all. Therefore, they'll keep on punching down on them, it seems. In fact, according to YouGov, the Tories are no longer the most popular party amongst anyone below the age of 70. And if that isn't indicative of a party that is dying out, and deservedly so, I don't know what is. However, it does reflect Sunak's policy move towards young people, and that is a pitch to reintroduce national service. The last people who actually did any of that literally are well over 70. In fact, the last conscripts were those born before the 1st of October 1939. So these would be people aged 85 or will turn that this year or over. The idea of today's youth, in fact, anyone under the age of 40 for the most part, being proud to serve in the armed forces by force in an attempt to foster a sense of national pride when this country is led by politicians acting like global pariahs or operating in the interests of the rich and not ordinary working class people is farcical. The very reason young people don't want to vote for you is because you disgust them on multiple different levels, and everything you stand for disgusts them, and they certainly, I would imagine, I certainly would feel like this. They have no intention of risking their lives for rich people who have blighted the lives of them and their families. Conscientious objection would, I should think, end up being rife, and I'd certainly rather go to prison than see any of my kids called up for this sick joke. It is, at the end of the day, though, a headline-grabbing gimmick, because just like the general election being called itself, the Tory party themselves, the rest of the parliamentary party, they had no idea Sunak was even going to announce this. It would also cost an estimated £2.5 billion, and that is completely uncosted. Sunak is so desperate right now to not be the Prime Minister that oversees the death of the Tory party in all but name. He will promise literally anything now in a bid to attract voters, and this one is truly pathetic. But also shows the youth vote is not one he knows he can win, so better to just target them to win the votes of older people instead. It would be churlish to not point out the fact that for years, in the name of cuts and austerity, the Tories have slashed our armed forces troop numbers and now seem intent on using our kids to fill the gaps. Over 14 years of Tory misrule, our armed forces have been cut by 27%, from 100,000 to 73,000 soldiers, to the point Sir Patrick Sanders, the Chief of the General Staff, has said we might need a citizen army if, for example, as these people often keep saying, Putin invades. But to which Sunak responded as being an unhelpful intervention. Yet now it's conscription making an appearance in the Tory manifesto. Free soldiers, therefore, in the form of our kids, making up for Tory cuts to the armed forces. Over my dead body. Keir Starmer's pitch, though, to the young is nothing to write home about either, because on the face of it, he's lying again to get what he wants before probably breaking his word once more later on, and of course he wants their votes. It is his defining characteristic, after all. His word is absolutely worthless.
Yes, I want to see 16 and 17-year-olds voting. They can go out and work. They can serve in our armed forces. And of course, if they are out and working, they pay tax. and therefore they should have a say over how the money they're paying in is being used. So yes, I want to see that vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. If you can work, if you can pay tax, if you can serve in your armed forces, then you ought to be able to vote.
He is now making the pitch to reduce the voting age from 18 to 16 on the basis that 16-year-olds go out to work, they can pay tax, therefore they should be able to vote. An argument many of us on the left have been making for a very, very long time. Sounds great on paper, would cost nothing more to implement, and sure, the argument is that we're in a general election campaign now, new announcements come at such times. So perhaps this is something Labour have been planning for a while, unlike Sunak's announcement, which has shocked everyone apparently within his party. However, there are issues here. First and foremost is the issue of whether you can believe anything Keir Starmer says. Even if it ends up written in the Labour Party manifesto, be wary of how such things get worded. He has weaseled out of previous pledges that were written down. He's done it on national TV, no less, down to how things are phrased. For example, his pledge to renationalise water, which he rode back on. When he rode back on that and was picked up on it by Robert Peston, if memory serves, he disputed the allegation, denied it because the pledge, as it was written, actually didn't say renationalise. It said bring back into public ownership. And he disputed that and sat there and argued that the two terms were different things. Equally, the manifesto will likely not mean anything anyway, certainly no more than Starmer's word, because as always happens, ways and means and circumstances after they get elected will mean, oh, sorry, can't deliver that anymore. Can't afford that now. It always happens, and it certainly will with Starmer. But underlining that in this pitch to woo young voters is that he might give the vote to 16-year-olds, but he might also be about to not only no longer axe tuition fees, another broken pledge, but might be about to do a Nick Clegg and hike them again as well.
Yeah. If you win the election, I'm assuming you want to be Education Secretary, would you raise tuition fees?
That is a really, really unpalatable choice. I do not want to have to do that. I absolutely don't, because when I speak to students across the country, what they tell me...
No, not going to rule it out,
when I speak to students across the country, what they tell me is that increasingly they can't manage the cost of living. We need to look at all of the options around that, and I want to make sure...
Bridget Phillipson will be Starmer's Education Secretary as things stand, and was asked on BBC Question Time this week if Labour would rule out tuition fee hikes, now that they have ruled out scrapping them, and she couldn't do so, even when it was pushed on her. Bearing in mind this is a party that has already ruled out a wealth tax on millionaires and billionaires to make up spending shortfalls, here are Labour now threatening to lump even more debt potentially on the shoulders of our kids as one of their chosen alternatives that they can do. All political choice, of course. She said on Question Time this was a really unpalatable choice. We really hope we don't have to do it. She didn't want to do that, but she would not rule it out. Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules for our kids, it seems. No wonder she's being referred to this week not so much as a red Tory, which we know she absolutely hates being called, but is being directly compared to Margaret Thatcher now in the choices she looks set to make if Labour gain a majority and win power. So young people have a choice between the main two parties, between one that wants to apparently conscript them into the army and another that will give future younger voters the vote earlier than they might have done otherwise, maybe, if you can trust Keir Starmer's word. But for those that can already vote this time around, they are looking at tuition fee hikes in all likelihood, and yet Labour remains the favoured party amongst that demographic. According to that same YouGov poll amongst young voters that I mentioned earlier before, actually right now it is all voters under the age of 70 as it happens. However, there has been a shift in this same poll in comparison to previous ones conducted regarding the voters under 40 specifically. And although Labour remain the most popular party amongst this age group, where previously the Liberal Democrats enjoyed a significant chunk of the youth vote, they frankly struggled to ever win it back after they agreed to hike tuition fees when they went into coalition with the Tories in 2010. What has happened now is the Green Party are filling that niche. In all age groups under 40, the Greens now occupy second place to Labour. Now you might look at that and think, well, they're well behind. I would remind you that polls show a trend more than actual figures that are quotable and provable, that are gospel. They are always estimates based on one pollster to another's methodologies, and they always vary from one to another. So this indicates a shift to one extent or another, and it's made all the more remarkable by the fact the Greens get barely any media attention. Too much of that is focused on Reform UK. Even now, who barely even made a dent at the local elections, look set on losing their one MP who was a defector anyway, and given that that was Lee Anderson, well, they can have him, frankly. That is testament to the Greens' use of social media, though, and that their policies are online all the time, that anybody can go and visit via their website, so nobody needs to wait until manifestos come out before an election to see what the Green Party actually stand for. And for example, where scrapping tuition fees goes, here's what current policy decided by Green Party members, as all policy is, says. Abolish fees in further education, and all courses in further education would be provided for free at the point of use. Write off all outstanding debt and resulting interest related to 24+ advanced learning loans provided by the Student Loans Company to fund tuition for level 3 and 4 courses. Increase the funding per student in further education to match that in schools. Initiate a swift transition from the current start-stop funding arrangements to a long-term funding process for further education provision over a 10-year period. Place all funding bodies back under the democratic control of local authorities and regional bodies, and as part of the transition to the universal basic income, reintroduce an education maintenance allowance at a level which would be effective in supporting disadvantaged students, and through a system which was clear and transparent and not open to inconsistency in application. Protect and improve the current support provision for disabled students. How this will be paid for, which no doubt many will be thinking, having seen that, will be by increasing the proportion of public expenditure given over to education. It will simply be a bigger priority under the Green Party than current parties regard it as. Other moves will be to integrate grammar schools, academies and free schools into the national system and block any more of them being created, ending this two-tier system of education that the Tories created. And they will also scrap the charitable status for private schools, which Labour have also backed off of now, as well as levy VAT and corporation tax on them. There are frankly just better offers for young people than the snake oil being sold to them by Sunak and Starmer, and I hope many more of them come to realise that, as well as other demographics too, who will be able to see where their taxes could and should be better spent than where they are now. Keir Starmer's lies, meanwhile, are becoming a focus of attacks on Labour in this election, and that will continue. And frankly, it isn't before time he was made to answer for all of them, with so many of them to his name. Everyone should be asking themselves, why should I trust that man? As this video delves into as a recommended next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.